crowd here for this Smarter Balanced event, our first Dine and Discuss from Southern Maine Partnership of the Year. I'm Anita Stewart McCafferty, and along with Patrick Phillips, we will be co-directing Southern Maine Partnership in Dr. Glenn Cummings' absence. So Dr. Glenn Cummings is with us. Should we say Dr. President Glenn Cummings, Professor, His Lordship? However, whichever of those that you would like to take. We're very honored that Glenn could make time in his busy schedule to join us this evening, to deign us with his presence. Yeah, right, all of that. It's good, and Glenn really is responsible for putting together this evening's event, so we're really honored that we have Sue Gendron here with us. Patrick in a moment will formally introduce her. And what I'd like to do is just to remind you real quickly of a couple of events that we have going on in the near future with Southern Maine Partnership. We do run a monthly principals meeting, which generally meets on the second Tuesday, correct, Jody? Dr. Capilouti and I are facilitating that along with Dr. Jeff Beaudry. And it usually runs the second Tuesday afternoon from 1 to 2:30. And we have a superintendent's monthly meeting that Patrick and I will be facilitating along with some other folks in Ed Leadership. This coming Friday is our first one from 7:45 to 9:15, a couple of floors down on floor 4, in room 423. So if you're a superintendent and you'd like to attend, if you could contact me before tomorrow afternoon, that'd be great, so Patrick and I can make sure that there are refreshments, appropriate amount of refreshments available. We also will be running on December 3rd a one-day conference that will take place at Unum, and that one-day conference will be around teacher evaluation. And we had originally planned, when we were planning that day, had thought that we would do breakout sessions around the instructional framework, so a Marshall breakout and a Marzano and a Danielson. Since that original plan, we've been listening to the field, and it seems like there's a lot more interest in help around the student growth component of it. So we think that we're going to switch gears and move in that direction, because we feel that as part of Ed Leadership and USM, that's an area that we could be most helpful to you. And Jeff Beaudry has arranged for Rick Stiggins to join us via Skype for a keynote. He's just written a new book, Defensible Evaluation, so we're really excited. It's all about student growth and how to include student growth in appropriate ways in teacher evaluation systems, so we're really grateful for that opportunity. So I don't take up any more airtime. I'm going to turn it over to Patrick Phillips, and he'll introduce Sue, and we'll get on with the business of the evening. So welcome everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm sorry, I do have, I'd like to invite people up, and then don't go away, Patrick. But I forgot to say too that as you were coming into the library, you might have seen that by the first floor elevator there is an author's wall that's just been newly installed here at USM, and we have 2 of our Ed Leadership professors that just recently published books. So Dr. Jody Capilouti just published in the past few months The Savvy Principal, and his book is on display. And then Dr. Jeff Beaudry just published within the last month, I think it just came out, Concept Mapping and Critical Thinking. So we're very pleased and privileged to have these 2 authors with us tonight.
Thank you, Anita. Very quick remarks. I also wanted to add that we are very grateful for the support of Unum for sponsoring not only tonight's event, but providing the financial wherewithal for a great deal of the Southern Maine Partnership work for the coming year. And I just want to make sure that we get accurate email list verification out on the table. So we do want to make sure that our communications go out to you effectively in the field. When I first started talking with Glenn, it must have been 4 months ago that we started chatting, I said, well, Glenn, I think I'm going to retire from the superintendency this year. Do you need any support with the Southern Maine Partnership? And he said, God, that'd be a great idea. So he loops me in by saying I can do a little bit of a part-time gig. The next thing you know, I'm co-directoring so at the University of Maine in Augusta. I don't know if bait and switch is in his resume, but it should be. It's very much a joy for me to introduce Sue Gendron, which I will do in just a moment. But before I do that, I wanted to give you an overview of our process for this evening. We're going to give Sue until about 5:10 or 5:15 to walk through her presentation with you. We're then very honored to have Rochelle Tome and is it Charlene? Charlene from the Department of Education here in Maine to provide some insight into the department's plans for the first formal implementation of Smarter Balance this coming year. So they'll have about 15 or 20 minutes to round out the main perspective. Then we'll stop and have dinner at about 5:30 to almost 6 or so. And then at 6, we'll reconvene and have time for Q&A. You'll see in the middle of your table some index cards. Our hope is that you'll jot down the most important questions from your table and get them to Anita and me at the first part of dinner. Then we'll be able to look for common themes to make sure that the high priority areas are put in front of our guest speakers tonight. So if you jot those down and get them to Anita or me at the end. Like I said, it's a very great honor and privilege to introduce Sue. You may know that I was deputy commissioner for several years while Sue was in the commissioner's office, and I have to say, up close and personal, she's an amazing individual. It's no surprise to me that she has gone on to great success with the International Center for Leadership and Education, and is now assumed an even more important position within that organization. She's a dynamo. She's a wonderful person. She's deeply committed to family, and just a great individual. I'll go on to the formal part. Her career in education spans a number of years in a number of roles, serving as kindergarten teacher, primary school principal, high school principal, assistant superintendent, superintendent of schools in Windham, which is where I first worked with her, and served as commissioner of education from 2003 to 2010, before assuming her role as policy coordinator for the Smarter Balanced Education Assessment Consortium. Sue joined the International Center as a senior fellow, and most recently assumed the position as president, where she leads a team of forward-thinking and innovative education leaders in developing and implementing the tools, resources, and relationships necessary to advance our nation's education agenda. Sue was a member of the Council of State School Officers, CCSSO board from 2006 to 2010, and served as its president from 2009 to 2010. She held several leadership positions with CCSSO, including board liaison for the Education Information Management Advisory Consortium, and a member of the Presidential Transition Task Force. She also served as chair of the Regional Education Laboratory, and also as a trustee of the University of Maine system. She's received many honors, no surprise there, including the Maine School Superintendent's Distinguished Educator Award, the Maine Superintendent of the Year Award, the Maine Education Association Friend of Education Award, the University of Southern Maine Distinguished Alumni Award, welcome back, the State of Education Technology Directors Association Pushing the Envelope Award, and Jobs for American Graduates National Education Leadership Award in 2009. Please join me in welcoming our friend Sue Gendron.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Can you all hear me? Jody, can you hear me in the back? Great. I'm going to not use the mic so that you can, in fact, see my screen. And I want to prep you, you're not just going to sit tonight, because I want you to experience a few things. And I'm also going to try to make some key connections for you. When Glenn and I talked about it this evening, we discussed the fact that folks are rolling up their sleeves, you're trying to think about the new assessments, and how do you implement college career standards, Common Core, and all that's happening. And Pat mentioned that there are cards on your table. Well, I want to also push you to think a little bit differently tonight. As I work with audiences across the country, we use a tool called Today's Meet. And so this is our Today's Meet for tonight's Dine and Discuss. And you can log in on your smartphones, on a digital device. It's a great tool for us to have a back-channel conversation. If you prefer to use technology to ask your questions during dinner, I'm going to hop on the site. I'll look at your questions. It's a great place for you to network. I might mention something, and you have another great resource that you think would really be beneficial for the folks in the audience. It's a place for you to share, to talk about the good things that are happening. But I will look at the questions. It will be posted for a week, so when you leave here and you want to go back and look at the conversation that was happening as I'm presenting, you can still network with folks afterwards. Okay? So Today's Meet, it's a great tool to use in your staff meetings. I have teachers using it in their classrooms so the kids are networking and having conversations together. So my goals for you tonight really are to think about, so what does it mean to design backwards? Why? How? What are the things that should be happening in the conversations in each of your building levels? I also want you to be thinking about, and this is the thing that keeps me up at night, as we were building the Common Core, having conversations, we also wanted to make sure, how do we get to implementation in every single classroom across this country? And it is a challenge, I'll have to tell you, as I have been in almost every state. What does it mean to transform our curriculum and instruction and assessment? And then how are we going to sustain effective practice? So we'll talk a little bit about all of these critical things. So when I think about beginning with the end in mind, there's a couple of things that really have driven my conversations. When Common Core was coming to the forefront, we wanted it to be more rigorous. We wanted it to be relevant for kids. And so one of the things that I learned a lot about when I was commissioner was, how do we pay attention to what's happening in our states? What are the jobs for our young people? What are the economic clusters that, as we're designing curriculum, we should be making connections with our leading business partners? Who are our community folks? Because they will, in fact, embrace our work. It will help teachers to have a better sense of what's happening. So one of the places that I go to try to look at where are the jobs is a report from Georgetown University. And there's a workforce education center at Georgetown University. And one of the things that they did was to project, so where will we be in 2018? We're almost there. There are significant changes that are happening, and I'm anticipating this is going to evolve. But when we started the conversation here in Maine about all kids post-secondary ready, this was the profile that was guiding some of the conversations. And you'll notice we are not the darkest. We're on that tier of more than 50% of our jobs will require post-secondary. 2-year community college, 4-year degrees. And here's what our kids are looking at today. What are the conversations we're having? So if you look at this list, this is the rank order of majors of young people in the United States today. So what are they going to do with general studies? Look where we have education, health, engineering, technology, communications, computer information is number 10 in the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, there are 3.5 million jobs in the United States today that are unfilled because our young people, the conversations, the experiences that they're engaging in are not helping them to look at, so where are the jobs? How do we build curriculum? When I visited Singapore It was amazing. The high school faculty were meeting on a weekly basis with the leading industries, their R&D folks. The kids were immersed in curriculum attached to those things. Here's what's happening in other countries. Business is number one, just like it is here. But notice what's number two, engineering and technology, computer information and science. If Anita was here, she would be absolutely with the next gen science standards that you're all working to implement. We need to have different conversations about, so what are the goals and what are we trying to help our kids achieve? Georgetown projects that by 2018, 59% of all jobs in Maine will require post-secondary education. And I think we're on a good path. We're about 4% below the national average, but this is the one that when they look at all the indicators, we're 32nd in the country in post-secondary intensity. So how are we implementing these new standards? How are we building the rigor, the expectation? What's our retention rate at our community colleges and at our university system? Those are key factors that I hope are guiding your conversations back in your schools. And here's the other piece that we have to help our young people. As we look at new jobs being created, there'll be 15,000 new jobs in Maine for post-secondary students. Only 200 new jobs for high school graduates. And as we look at transitions, those of us who might retire, Pat asked me earlier, aren't you going to retire? Too much to do. So, but we'll have 196,000 new jobs in Maine, 115,000 of those new jobs post-secondary, 70,000 for high school grads, and only 11,000 for those who leave us. And hopefully we can bring them back to our schools. So, how is your curriculum, as you've been implementing the new standards, how are you thinking about this environment of what are the jobs that young people need to be experiencing? Is your curriculum exposing them as we think about relevant? I'm going to give you a 2-minute table conversation to share with each other. And I'm going to time you because I only have another 45 minutes. So brief conversation at your tables. What are you doing around this area?
What have you been doing?
Hey. Hey, how are you?
Good, and you?
Good.
Small world.
Doing the background planning. The high school down, the graduation requirements, starting this year,
I'm a mover. I hope you're...
Yeah, no, that's fine.
You're okay?
Perfect. I don't want to move anything.
We're elementary, before the fifth grade, so like I don't know a lot about in-depth career prep at the middle school, even high school level. We know there's been a lot more work. I do special ed and transition planning for those students and things like that. But we are doing a lot of the backwards planning. We've been able to ensure that the graduation requirements and the high school standards are all in place. We're feeling it trickle down.
Same here. We've done the high school requirements, and we've kind of rewritten the report card based off those high school requirements to some extent, and tried to link them, together. But I do have the elementary, so I feel like it's a little bit harder to see that bigger picture, and the job preparation, the college preparation. I wish I could see some of it.
With a lot of the Common Core stuff that we're doing now, there is that more of that look at the practical application than there ever was before. What is the real life application and how is that?
You're the
More
go-to
so than
person.
it was even 2
So
years
to
ago.
pause
1,
this,
2, 3.
Okay.
Please bring your conversations to a close. Thank you. 2 minutes of chat. Okay. So I hope you
have to
had
learn.
some insights. I had a chance to eavesdrop a little. So one of the other things that we talk about is rigor and raising expectations. So one of the tools that we are using in Smarter Balance as we are selecting stimulus passages for your students to be able to look at is a Lexile scale. How many of you are using the text complexity tools from Common Core in your schools? So I see a few hands. So one of the tools that we encourage you to be thinking about using in order to really raise the expectations in our classrooms is a text complexity tool where we look at qualitative measures. And the qualitative measures are what's the meaning that the author was suggesting in the text. So what's the knowledge base that students need? What's the language? Is it contemporary? Is it archaic? But to use some rubrics, and on the department's website, I'm sure there's a link to this, and there is. Rochelle's nodding yes.
There is.
You also can find a great resource at CCSSO, and if you do a search on text complexity, it'll give you background. So qualitative measures. It's really a key conversation for faculties to be having so that we get agreement about, so what's the goal, where do we want to be? And Smarter Balance is having those very conversations. Every text goes through a review. We also put every text through a quantitative review. And we're using Lexiles, and there's 3 or 4 other tools that you can use. And we've set some expectations of where your young people need to be. So often, folks will say, I don't believe that. So I want to give you a tool that you can use back in your schools, and I'm happy to share my PowerPoint with you tonight. If you want my PowerPoint on today's meet, give me your email, and I'll send it to you. So this is a Lexile, and a Lexile is a quantitative measure where we look at the word length, sentence length, structure of text. And it's on a scale of 200 to 2,000. And in fact, Metametrics, who created the Lexile, is going to be doing a linking study with the Smarter Balanced assessments. And folks have been asked here in Maine if you want to participate in that study, but it'll help us to bridge other data so that parents and teachers can look at readability. So this was a study, and I deliberately chose this study, and we've revamped it, and the scores are a little higher. But when we were building Common Core, one of the things we were challenging us all to think about, higher ed said to all of us, kids can't make inferences, they're not able to read the higher text. And this is what was happening. We looked at high schools across the country, we looked at content areas in English language arts, sciences, social studies, did the same study with entry-level freshman courses in the same content areas. And so in high school literature classes, you probably can't see this on the bottom, the Lexile scores were around 725 to about 950, okay? Those are all your English classes across high school. Remember that number. College literature. And college literature, for those entry-level courses, around a little above 800 to about 1050. We then looked at science social studies texts. What do you think happens? It goes up. Here's what happens in the other content areas. 950 to about 1150. Here's college, same thing. 1100 to about 1325. They then did an analysis of what's happening in the military. And as we look at the data today, ladies and gentlemen, 70% of our young people are not eligible for the military any longer because they cannot get the appropriate score on the ASVAB. Literacy. And every year, 1% of our young people are added to that number because they cannot achieve the level of literacy. 1,200 was the score that was necessary to be able to read complex technical manuals. Personal use. So turn to your neighbor. You have 30 seconds. What do you think personal use is? Where would you fall?
Right up. Right up.
Like I'm thinking like, word manuals and like
It depends on what you read.
I'm trying to think average. Could be mine, could be yours.
All right, 1, 2, 3.
Under 1,000.
Let me bring you back.
I'm thinking it's
So here's where our personal use needs to be. Needs to be. So it is lower. So, and the documents that we looked at, newspapers, USA Today, 1,200. Wall Street Journal, 1,360. Insurance forms, ballots, young people being able to go into the voting booth and to be able to understand the ballot and what they're voting on. Looked at bank statements, mortgage documents. in order for our young people to be good citizens, to be able to manage their lives on a daily basis, they have to have a literacy, be able to read technical materials at around 1150 to 1350. Entry-level jobs, where do you think those are? Entry-level jobs. Right on line with personal skills. And they also looked at the SAT, ACT, and AP exams, and that's where they are. They're going to change. David Coleman, who now leads the College Board, is going to revamp the SATs. ACTs also being revamped, looking at all of those critical pieces. So I share these with you because, does anyone know what our target is for Common Core? So I want you to go and download that document. The expectation for our graduating seniors with Common Core is that they will be able to read complex material between 1240 and 1385. That's our goal, that's our target. So that's the bar, and when Smarter Balance creates the assessments, there are grade bands, and you should know those grade bands, and your curriculum should reflect a staircase of development so that we move our students about 40 Lexile points up that scale and in qualitative and quantitative measures, so that by the end of the school year, when your students sit for that Smarter Balanced assessment, they're not going to be shocked by the complexity of the text that they're going to be asked to read. And if we do that, our students are really going to be progressing to be college and career content ready. I also want to differentiate for you. Smarter Balance has made a real distinction, as we've talked about. So what are we preparing our kids for, and what are we measuring? So the test is not going to measure all the things that you know kids need to be college career ready. We're only going to measure content readiness. And we work closely with higher education and K-12 teachers to try to define, so what does that look like? There's a fabulous tool that I encourage you to download. It's called the Achievement Level Descriptors. And I'm going to jump out of this PowerPoint for just a second. How many of you have been on the Smarter Balance website? Okay, a lot of you. So when you go to the Smarter Balance website, there's a couple of key places for you. So under Smarter Balance, when you go to the tab for Smarter Balance, there's a tab here for achievement level descriptors. And what those descriptors will provide for you for grades 3 to 8 in high school, it gives you a profile based on a scale, a four-point scale of how students will progress to be college career ready. It's also a handy tool, especially where Maine is around proficiency-based documentation, because it breaks down the standards and looks at a developmental spectrum. So I have schools that I'm working with in California that are actually using it to create a standards-based report card, helping parents to see this is what a student needs to be able to do before this proficiency. So a great tool for you. And I was talking with some of you as you were coming in, if you haven't gone on here and taken the practice test. So there's a practice test that's constantly upgraded. I would have every faculty member in a school take the practice test. Here's another tool that we found to be really helpful. It's important for us to talk about what's this going to look like. So I get local newspapers to run a little column, are you as smart as a 5th grader? And we run the questions so that the community starts to see. We need to be transparent so that everybody knows exactly where we're going, why we're going there. So make sure you explore Smarter Balance website. Lots and lots of tools, and Rochelle will talk about that as well. Webinars, and there we go. So a couple of other, and I find that parents find this helps the conversation. I remember when we launched our college career initiative in 2004 here in Maine, there were a lot of naysayers who said, my kid doesn't need that. I can remember going down east, and they would say, parents would say to us, or high school kids said, hey, Mrs. Gendron, I can earn $100,000 out on the lobster boat. well, I think about every time I see the window shrinking for lobstering or fishing and all of those pieces, our kids need to have these skills to be able to follow. So there's the band, there's your target of where kids need to be. We know this is critical. Here's how literacy expectations have changed. This is where construction workers work. It's now entry-level construction jobs, 1360. Craftsmen, our IT folks, our plumbers, our machine toolists, all those folks who now have to be able to interface with technology, our automobile mechanics, literacy level much higher. Nursing, always high. Nurse practitioners, we're raising the level. Sales. Again, I think about my 20-year-old grandson now. I usually go to him when I get new technology, because he can just figure it out. But we all have to be able to read that. There's one profession that's declined. What do you think it is? Not teaching. No. Secretaries. Technology has changed the skill set. So another key conversation that I want you to be prepared for, we've got to be transparent. You know, when Maine adopted the SAT for all 11th graders, that was incredibly controversial. But we tried to be transparent. 9 months before the kids actually took the test, we went on the road. Because we knew we were going to drop. We were in the top 10, and we knew we were going to go to number 50. We told our story. We didn't get a lot of backlash. We're making some significant changes. So are you preparing for a potential dip? Smarter Balanced is going to embed National Assessment of Educational Progress test items in the test. Because the other thing that drove Common Core, drove the states coming together in a consortia, was the variability across our country. That we were all setting proficiency at different levels. So the good news, here, this is 2009, and I deliberately, again, want you to have a context where we've been, where we're headed. So proficient is here. Very shortly, Smarter Balance is going to go through standard setting, and they will define what are those cut scores for us. And Maine has always performed well on the National Assessment of Educational Progress. But here's what I want you to be thinking about. So in this column of proficient, that's how each of the states on my chart has defined proficiency. And we have set our cut scores. We've used a bookmarking process to do that. And the reason I want you to look at this, Massachusetts was number 1, 4th grade reading. Massachusetts' score was 234. On the MCATs, Massachusetts said 54% of their kids were proficient. So all those kids in Massachusetts who were proficient earned the equivalent of a 234. In Maine, at the same time, we said, and I was commissioner, so I was at the table, we said 71% of Maine kids were proficient. They needed a 209. There's a gap there. And you can see where other states in Smarter Balance. Missouri is a Smarter Balance state. Missouri is always 1 or 2 on NAEP. Missouri has said we're not lowering our scores. So our cut scores in all likelihood will be higher, and the percent of kids who have been proficient in your schools will no longer be proficient. We have to talk about, we've changed the test, we've changed the expectations, we've raised the bar, and if we don't start getting folks on board, Montana's going to have a horrible time telling their story. Here is 8th grade data for you. You can see 71%. The gap's not. Missouri was number 1 at that time, but we'll have fewer kids who are hitting the mark. Here's math, 4th grade. And again, 234 versus Massachusetts 255. And then here's 8th grade math. And much closer story, but the gap is a little bit less. But it is going to impact us as we go through, and you're going to want to watch to see what the cut scores are that Smarter Balance. They've developed a comprehensive process whereby we'll have technical folks, psychometricians, experts in assessment, And then there's going to be the opportunity for every state to have participation in looking at those cut scores. This is probably the piece that's going to get the most scrutiny as we go forward. What are these cut scores? How do we compare to Park? Because the governors that drove these conversations said we want comparability across the states. We don't want this variation any longer. Now the political climate has changed quite a bit since we had those conversations back in 2008 and 9, but I think what you're going to see happen as Maine implements Smarter next spring, you probably will see a dip. Make sure you're talking to your boards, talking to your teachers, and help them to see how we've raised the rigor and why we want to do that. So, a couple of things I hope that you've been doing as you're implementing this process. Did you do a needs assessment? Did you look at your key components of your data? Where were you with curriculum instruction, and to develop a comprehensive plan for implementation? And did you use your data to identify a key focus? So some of the schools we're working with, it's literacy, it's writing. I can share with you one of the schools that we've worked with across the country. We've seen dramatic growth by having a clear focus, unrelenting monitoring, implementation. Have you talked about non-negotiables in this plan? We also know that so often I'm asked to come in and they'll say, Sue, can you help us with assessment? Well, I can't help you with assessment unless we look at your instruction. And we have to have a master plan about what is the curriculum instruction going to look like. So I want to have you play with some things that I think I know you should be doing in your classrooms. The types of conversations, what your curriculum needs to look like to reflect the instructional shifts and what assessment will look like. So which number does not belong? Can you all see them? 9, 16, 25, 43.
43.
Why?
It's not a square.
It's not a square. Good answer. Anything else? 16. Why? It's even. The rest are odd. Great answer.
9.
Why?
Because 1 is 6, all the others add up to 7.
Oh, creative solution. Nice. All the others add up to 7. Yes?
9, it's a single digit.
Single digit. Absolutely. What did I just model for you? Multiple answers, right? Multiple answers. This is what your kids are going to see. They're going to see items like this, where it's not multiple choice. It is explain. I want to see your ability, I want to see your reasoning. I want to see how you thought through. What are the mathematical understandings that you have? All right? So, that, and what I would be doing, I'm going to use formative assessment. I want to be watching to see, we know that if we use formative assessment in our classrooms, it is the #1 mitigator of student gaps in learning. And when Rick comes, I'm sure you're going to hear more and more about that. Smarter Balance believes that we absolutely have to focus on formative assessment. On the Smarter Balance website, until September 30th, so you have a short window, there's a digital library. And the digital library was created to give teachers resources, strategies on formative practices and processes. You notice I didn't say assessment. What are the things we're going to do in our classrooms minute to minute, day to day, to gather information about where our kids are? So we want to be using those strategies to use a gradual release, to be able to know what kind of instruction do we need. How am I going to scaffold that instruction to meet the needs of all my kids? And I want to constantly make connections for them as we're having this discourse, this mathematical conversation, and I want to model the process of thinking. What you're going to see on the Smarter Balance assessment, and I hope your teachers are doing every day, what's more important is the thinking. So kids might get 2 points to demonstrate their thinking. If they get the wrong answer, they still get scored. It used to be in the past, they had to be able to demonstrate the correct answer. Their thinking is equally as important. Smarter actually stepped back from using artificial intelligence for scoring, and we're going to do more hand scoring. Okay? And we got comments from young children, 3rd, 4th graders, who said, I love the fact that you're letting me show you what I can do. That was a little boy in Connecticut. And as we looked at student work, we realized we were missing tremendous amount of information. So now Smarter's going to hand score more of those constructed response questions. We also want your kids to be able to do things like this. So this is a problem that your students might encounter. I'm going to let you have a brief conversation at your tables. So there are 3 sacks with red and blue tiles in them. One is labeled all red, one is labeled all blue, and one is labeled red and blue. Okay? 3 sacks, red, blue, and red and blue. There is one thing you know for sure. They are all mislabeled. You cannot look in the sacks. So I want you to put on your imagination hats, and in the table, on your tables, there are 3 sacks. You may not look in the sacks, but you may select one tile from one sack. Which sack would you reach into so that you could correctly label all the sacks? So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes at your table to solve this problem. So by this link,
Pick the red, the blue. Yeah, I was going to say pick the red, the blue. Well, you wouldn't know if it's still next time.
Oh, you would because
that is correct.
they're all like if you pick the red and blue, but now it's either red or blue. You know the other bag.
But isn't it a probability? It's a probability, isn't it? I mean, that's true. Well, it's kind of like it's kind of like to pick the 3 windows. If I show you what's behind one window, would you want to, take what's there, or would you want to roll the dice?
If you know they're all wrong, right, and you pull out the red one, it depends on what it says. If it says red and blue,
If it says red, it comes out as mislabeled, and it's blue.
I didn't really want to be by the video.
it could be the blue bag or it could be the blue.
You pull a red one out of the red bag, it's the red bag.
No, but she said they're all wrong.
Right, so that's what I mean.
Oh,
So if you
yeah, then it would be the red and blue.
That's the only option you get left.
You pull from red and blue.
Yeah, I agree. And then the other 2 are already wrong. Whatever you pull, that's that whole bag.
So you know that one is all that whole thing. I'm good. Who's your teacher? I left everything in my truck. I'm thinking about making a break to go get it.
And I'm taking notes on my phone. I'm not texting.
I have Lowell and Alicia here.
Right, I'm videotaping, but not you guys. You have to be brilliant to get videotaped. You have to be absolutely brilliant.
5 different tables.
So we decided to pick one of either the red
Okay, 1, 2, 3.
or the red.
I guess I didn't pick it
Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt.
One. You get one choice.
Happening.
2.
If I was with you all day, I'd give you 15 minutes to solve this. I was in Hawaii 2 weeks ago, and I actually had a math teacher come up to me, and I had to cut it off. I was doing just a keynote like tonight, and I gave them the problem, and he said, can you give us the answer? Because I didn't even tell them. So I'm going to make sure we talk about it. So which bag are you going to pull the tile from?
Red and blue.
The red and blue, the one that's mislabeled as red and blue.
Why?
Because if you pull one out, you know it's mislabeled. If it's red, then that's the red bag, which means the one that's labeled as red and blue is the blue bag, and the one that's labeled as blue is the red bag.
And how did you arrive at that? What did you know?
I was listening to them.
So this would be an 8th grade problem. So think about the domains, the expectations in middle school. So, students have to be able to make estimations, they have to be able to project. So it would, in fact, be an 8th grade problem. Now, what was happening at your tables? Conversation. Yes.
We were talking about engagement. Like we were really engaged in the problem.
You were engaged. There was what you hear us talk about this mathematical discourse, and there were other things happening at tables. I saw people drawing, creating the sacks, labeling them, marking them. They need to visualize those, right? I had a group of teachers who at the table, someone had a red phone, a blue phone, and a red, white, and blue phone. So they were in the middle of the table. I've had people rip up paper and label them and make the tiles and actually pull from the sack. So I share this with you. This is an example of what your kids should be doing every day in your classrooms. It's not worksheets. It is having this conversation. You were making some comments at this table about the change in behavior for kids. And it's also about perseverance. So the mathematical practices, kids have to be able to problem solve. We want them to be able to use what you hear us talk about, fluency. Fluency is not just getting it right, it's using mathematical terms. It's being able to be effective and efficient. That's what fluency means in the Common Core. We also want to make sure that kids are communicating and can defend their reasoning. So when I do this kind of problem in my classroom, I'm looking for evidence of learning. And one of the critical things, as we brought stakes together to create smarter balance, we had a different mindset. And I wish, Jeff and I were talking earlier, and Patrick, if I had my magic ball, I would do away with federal accountability and let us go back to where Maine was when we were having conversations about local assessments, about creating a body of evidence. Well, when Smarter came together, our theory of action was how do we give actionable data and information to teachers to inform your instruction? Isn't that what we want? We want information to help our kids. And so if you implement in your classroom and look at the standards closely and create these kinds of experiences, your kids won't have any trouble with the Smarter Balance assessment. Because what I was doing, I was actually watching for your reasoning. Were you able to make sense of the mathematics that was there? You were engaged, weren't you? I mean, I couldn't get you back because you wanted to continue the conversation. I've actually had folks, even after we've had 15 minutes, some folks will say to me, I still don't get it. Can we have more conversation? So the other thing, it was flexibility. We allowed you to explore, to use different ways of problem solving. And we want to look at representations flexibility in your classrooms. This is at the heart of what we're trying to do in Common Core mathematics and persevering. So when we talk about designing backwards, here's what we also want you to be thinking about. So it's what is the analysis, what are the results that we want to be able to learn about our kids. It's all about the learning and how we are assessing the outcomes. So the debate that's happening here now about, so are the standards rigorous enough? We also have to help our constituents. Common Core is not your curriculum. It defines the expectations, the outcomes that we want for kids. And we have to help our neighbors, our school board members, our legislators. I do a lot of work in Missouri. They call me the myth buster in Missouri. Because there's this misperception about what's curriculum instruction and that the standards don't tell you what to use. It sets the expectations. And so one of the things as we design backwards, it's really thinking about the assessment before we decide how we're going to teach. Thinking about the assessment But you can't think about the assessment unless you do a couple of things. And these are the conversations that are the richest that are happening in our schools today. Do our teachers have an acute understanding of those standards? What are the outcomes? Do we understand evidence-centered design? So Smarter Balance is built on the premise of evidence-centered design. And Jim Pellegrino from University of Illinois is a key member of the Technical Advisory Committee for Smarter Balance. And as we began to look at, and you're going to see this is going to impact the whole assessment industry. What we're thinking about with evidence-centered design, so what's the interpretation of the standard? What does it kids need to know? What is it they need to be able to do? What is the cognitive level? So again, as we think about rigor, so Smarter Balanced is using some tools that Karen has, is a cognitive rigor matrix. If you haven't pulled that off the website, I encourage you to do so, because it helps to define the depth of knowledge or the cognitive level. Every question has a depth of knowledge level. We also want to make sure we know what the evidence needs to look like. So what is it that students need to produce? And if you have those conversations with your colleagues, we're going to get closer to all of us interpreting the standards and what proficiency, key as we're moving towards this new era of proficiency-based diplomas here in our state. What is that going to look like? How do we know a student who graduates from one school to the other will have the same level of skills? So how are you mapping those standards? Have you thought about that? What are the standards that you have to repeat? How are you building comprehensive units to make sure you're targeting these areas and designing your assessments? And how do we plan for instruction with our kids? So as we look at the standards, how many of you have deconstructed the standards? Okay. How many of you have deconstructed them as you're sitting designing your curriculum? So a lot of us, 3 years, 4 years ago when the Common Core was launched, we brought teachers in from all over and we asked you to deconstruct because we wanted you to understand the standards. It was done in isolation without a connection to the learning.